Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into something that is absolutely fascinating, but honestly, a little terrifying. We're looking at how human psychology is actively infecting the machine world. We tend to think of artificial intelligence as this cold, perfectly objective, calculating machine, but the truth? It's learning from us, and as it learns, it's inheriting all of our deeply ingrained flaws.
Think about that number for a second. Over 150, psychologists have identified that there are actually more than 150 hidden, unconscious human biases at play in our minds every single day. Think about confirmation bias, where we naturally favor information that just confirms what we already believe, or affinity bias, where we instinctively prefer people who look and sound exactly like us. These are instinctive mental shortcuts we use to categorize people and situations without even realizing we're doing it. And the massive scale of these unconscious human biases is exactly what we are currently transferring straight into AI systems. It's a critical flaw baked right into the foundation of our technology. So, what's the root of the problem here? Well, it essentially boils down to this. We constantly mistake our belief systems for actual knowledge systems. From the time we're kids, our minds undergo immense mental preconditioning. We are told stories, we absorb cultural norms, and we internalize stereotypes based entirely on our environment. Over time, those mere beliefs harden in our minds. We falsely accept them as absolute knowledge. And then, here's the kicker. We feed that localized knowledge into our algorithms as if it were some universal truth. All right, here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. First, we'll look at the 150-plus hidden human biases. Then, we'll unmask AI gender bias, followed by race, representation, and algorithms. Fourth, we'll examine the politics of AI. And finally, how we can help rewrite the AI narrative. Okay, Section 1, 150-plus hidden human biases, the psychological flaw. To really figure out how AI makes decisions, we actually have to look in the mirror. The virtual world isn't some separate, perfect utopia, right? It's just a mirror reflecting our own psychological flaws. So, how do we handle this as investigators? Our source material outlines a 3-step method for dealing with these biases, and these are basically going to be our rules of engagement today. First, know them well and recognize they exist. Literally nobody is entirely free of bias. Second, think critically using data. Don't look at a problem like a coin with just two sides. Look at it like a multifaceted diamond. And third, challenge traditions and assumptions. Moving on to Section 2, Unmasking AI Gender Bias, the Angel and the Monster. Let's bring in our first suspect, gender bias. Here's something you have to keep in mind. Generative AI is trained on absolutely massive datasets, and those are largely pulled from dominant cultures. Historically speaking, patriarchal traditions have essentially treated males as the intellectual default. If we look at feminist literary critics like Sandra Gilbert and Susan Goober, for example, they noted how traditional texts either completely silence women or they flatten them into two extreme caricatures, the submissive, idealized angel or the hysterical, deviant monster. So does our 150-plus biases problem mean AI is going to do the exact same thing? Let's actually run a quick mental experiment here to find out. Imagine you type this prompt into an AI. Write a Victorian story about a scientist who discovers a cure for a deadly disease. I want you to really think about what an AI's immediate default output is going to be. Without explicitly asking for a male or female character, who's the machine instinctively going to invent? Look at the contrast on this one. Early tests almost always default completely to a male protagonist, a Dr. Edmund type. It proves that the system has inherited our traditional biases, which is heavily influenced by things like anchoring bias in our historical literature. But, and this is crucial, look at the progressive counter-narrative emerging on the right side there. AI is learning fast. Sometimes it actually generates a story putting a female scientist right at the center. It shows the bias exists, for sure, but the machine is capable of evolving. All right, let's try another prompt. Describe a female character in a Gothic novel. Is the AI going to fall straight into that traditional literary binary, where women are defined entirely by their physical beauty and total helplessness, rather than, intellect, depth, and agency? Well, a lot of the time, the AI spits out the trope on the left, a trembling, pale, helpless girl just waiting for a male savior. But when it's challenged, or when we use more progressively updated algorithms, we get the output on the right, a rebellious, brave protagonist ready to fight her own battles. This completely proves that while AI inherits our hidden biases, it can be actively challenged and improved if we just ask the right questions. That brings us to Section 3, Race, Representation, and Algorithms, the default settings.
So, how do these large language models handle racial diversity? Do they just lean toward Eurocentric defaults because of the historical data they ingest? To answer this, we look to academic heavyweights in algorithm bias, like Timnit Gebru and Sophia Noble. They have well established that algorithms are simply not neutral. In fact, they often reproduce systemic racism by basically treating whiteness as the baseline default. And as that quote reminds us, more data doesn't mean better data. If the massive anthologies fed into the AI are biased from the start, the AI just amplifies that dominant voice.
Let's interrogate the system again. If we prompted simply to describe a beautiful woman, what physical or intellectual traits do you honestly think a massive digital data set will prioritize? Think about how our innate human affinity biases have shaped the classical literature that this machine has been reading and ingesting over centuries.
You can literally see a tug-of-war happening inside the AI right here. Historically, the AI might default to Eurocentric physical traits, using these old-school metaphors like skin like moonlight or marble, drawn straight from classical traditions that focus heavily on physical parameters. But we are progressively seeing a real shift toward quality-based descriptions, focusing instead on intelligence, confidence, and a radiant spirit. The AI is learning to move away from body-focused descriptions toward actually celebrating inner qualities.
All right, Section 4, the politics of AI, geopolitics and algorithms.
Now this is wild. Are algorithms actually shaped by the national borders of the companies that build them? Check out this data comparison. If you ask the American-based OpenAI to generate a satirical poem about global leaders, say Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, or Kim Jong-un, it will readily generate that content. But if you ask the Chinese-based model DeepSeek about its own leadership like Xi Jinping or about historical events like Tiananmen Square, it actively refuses to prompt, stating the topic is beyond its scope.
What we are observing here is a fascinating clash: liberal generation versus deliberate algorithmic control. And to be totally clear, we aren't taking a side here, we're just objectively reporting what the source material highlights. But it perfectly demonstrates how companies impose deliberate algorithmic controls to shape exactly what users can and cannot see. Technology is simply never free of the geopolitical realities and institutional biases of its creators.
And finally, Section 5, Rewriting the AI Narrative, a call to action. Okay, so with over 150 hidden biases infiltrating these systems, from gender to race to global politics, how do we as ordinary people push back and fix the machine? Well, the most crucial takeaway from our sources today is this: don't just be a downloader, be an uploader. If we want AI to actually reflect a fair, diverse, and accurate world, we have to stop passively consuming information and start actively uploading our own diverse stories, histories, and regional knowledge to the internet.
So here is how you actually combat AI bias in your own life. Upload regional languages to digital platforms like Wikipedia. Tell indigenous stories to shatter those old stereotypes. Bottom line, don't let laziness silence marginalized voices. If AI lacks data from the global south or marginalized groups, it's partly because those communities need to aggressively publish their digital narratives. We have to feed the machine diverse datasets so it doesn't just automatically default to the dominant historical voice. I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought today. If literally all human knowledge is inherently shaped by our perspectives, can AI ever truly be free of bias? And honestly, should it be? Maybe perfect neutrality is just an impossible illusion. Maybe our ultimate goal shouldn't be to build a completely unbiased machine, but to build a machine where harmful biases are highly visible, challenged, and constantly corrected by a wonderfully diverse human world. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to go out there and be an uploader.